Magandang gabi po. Ito po si Noel Pangilinan for this week's edition of Rewind, a review of Filipino-American history. Why are Filipino Americans being targeted by racially motivated physical attacks from California to New York in the past months? Of course, references to COVID-19 as the China virus or Kung flu or Asian virus by some moronic politicians contributed to the spike in attacks against Asian Americans and yes, Filipino Americans. But discrimination against Filipinos did not just happen overnight. This racism against our people has its roots in a war more than 100 years ago, and it has reared its ugly head time and time again during the early years of Filipino migration to this country. During the brutal Filipino-American War, American soldiers called native Filipinos as Gugus. The term Gugu is a racial epithet equivalent to the N-word that later metamorphosed into Guk, which American soldiers used as a derogatory term to refer to Koreans in the 50s and Vietnamese in the 60s and 70s. By the 1920s, there were about 45 to 48,000 Filipino agricultural laborers already toiling in fruit and vegetable farms in Oregon, California, and Washington states. In these states, Filipino farm workers harvested asparagus, grapes, strawberries, carrots, lettuce, potatoes, and beets. These migrant workers were mostly men. White American farm laborers resented the influx of Filipinos whom they see as competition for scarce jobs in the face of a shrinking economy. White American men were also angered by the Filipino workers' penchant for going out with white American women in taxi dance halls. The first recorded violent anti-Filipino incident in the U.S. mainland took place in Stockton, California on New Year's Eve in 1926. White men entered hotels and pool halls looking for Filipinos to attack. Filipinos were stabbed and beaten, but the newspaper, the Stockton Daily Evening Record, reported that Filipinos ran amok, attacking whites instead of blaming the white culprits. Other mobs raided Filipino boarding houses the same night, smashing furniture and beating young men with the goal of deporting all Filipino farm workers from the valley. The sheriff's deputies described the mobs as armed and determined to kill every Filipino they found. The manhunt for Filipinos lasted for 4 days. In September 1928 in Wenatchee Valley, Washington State, white farm workers attacked Filipino laborers, expressing their opposition to the relationship between the Filipinos and white women. A year later, in October 24, 1929, in Exeter, a farming community in Central California, San Joaquin Valley, a mob of 300 white men stormed the Filipino camp, stoned and clubbed about 50 Filipinos, and burned the barn. About 500 Filipinos were driven out of the district. The most explosive anti-Filipino riot occurred in Watsonville, another California town near the coast. On January 11, 1930, a small Filipino club leased a dance hall from two Americans in Palm Beach. The thought of Filipinos dancing with white women angered Watsonville citizens. On January 20, 1930, about 200 Americans hunted Filipinos on the streets, and on the following day, the dance hall was raided. 2 days later, Filipinos were beaten and one Filipino was killed by a mob of 500 white Americans who also destroyed the Filipino quarters. Remember his name, Fermin Tobera. A few days later, on January 28, 1930, a Filipino clubhouse belonging to the Filipino Federation of America in Stockton was bombed. In August 1930, a bundle of dynamite was also thrown in the camp of 100 sleeping Filipinos near Ridley, California, in an effort to drive out the more than 500 Filipinos working in the region. Around the same time, about 400 white vigilantes attacked a Filipino club in nearby Monterrey where they severely beat up many Filipinos. When police attempted to stop the beatings, the vigilantes called them "gugu lovers." Minor riots and clashes also occurred in Filipino farm workers communities in San Jose and San Francisco, California. Sadly, this racist aggression against Filipino Americans has cropped up again in a big way almost 100 years later. This has been another episode of Rewind, a review of Filipino American history. Send us your feedback and like our page. Ito po si Noel Pangilinan, nagsasabing salamat at ingat.